yet pursuing to improve the way we do things and to help to make sure that we're addressing a situation that some would fear is getting somewhat out of hand.
Well, a warning there from the Premier of Manitoba, Brian Pallister, saying his province is ready and willing to help the asylum seekers crossing illegally from the United States. But Pallister does not want to do it alone. In the past 2 months, at least 100 migrants have crossed at the town of Emerson. Quebec has seen a similar spike. So does Canada have a looming crisis on its hands? And what, if anything, should be done about it? Well, it is time for the Sunday Scrum. Joining us now is freelance columnist Susan Riley, John Ibbotson of the Globe and Mail, and Katie O'Malley of iPolitics.ca, all of whom are in Ottawa today. So thanks for joining us once again. Susan, I'm going to begin here with you. A question I want all of you to throw your opinion on. Are we facing at this moment in time a crisis when it comes to refugee seekers?
I don't think so. I think what we've always had a trickle of people coming across the border illegally. It's recently become a stream, but it's nowhere near a flood. So I don't think it's a crisis. That being said, there are, there'll be pressures on local areas where most people are coming, and those people the officials there do deserve help.
Sorry, John?
Yeah, these are mostly Somali migrants who've come into the United States who fear under the Trump administration that they're going to be detained and deported, though they won't be deported back to Somalia. The United States would never do that. And they figure they have a better chance coming into Canada. But it's a vexed question. People are risking their lives. They're paying obscene amounts of money to smugglers to get them close to the border, and then they're crossing in very difficult conditions. People are losing fingers and toes. We're going to have a fatality if this keeps up. So we need to address the situation, but we need to address also the fact that these refugee claimants are likely going to fail in their claims. There is no good reason for Canada to accept them as refugees. The United States is not violating any international norms, nor is it likely to, even under this president, regarding the handling of refugee claimants. So it's a mess. And I think I'm with Doug Saunders, the Globe columnist, who says we need to find some way to normalize the situation by allowing refugee claimants to come to proper border crossings, make their application. But those applications need to be dispatched as quickly as possible, because these people should not be given the false expectation that they are going to become Canadian citizens. Under our existing laws, they're not.
Katie, you're nodding your head there.
Yeah, I agree. It would be great if we could come up with at least a short-term plan that would allow these folks to cross in a more sort of orderly fashion at a border office, where they can then fill out the same forms that they end up filling out when they cross illegally after the RCMP sort of pick them up and take them to the right locale. It's an unwieldy system. I think it is really important that Canadians understand that these are not people, at this point at least, who are crossing the border illegally and then who want to disappear into the Canadian wilderness. These are actually people who do want to file this paperwork. It's because of sort of the quirk of the safe third-party agreement that they have to go about doing it this way. So yeah, the question becomes, how do we continue to honor that and not suspend it, but come up with a more reasonable way of processing these people?
Well, you raise the safe third country agreement, and as you say, how do you honor it without suspending it? Can you honor it without suspending it, Susan?
Well, Jason Kenney this week suggested closing the loophole, which basically says if you present yourself at the border, you're going to be turned away. They're going to say, I'm sorry, you're coming from the U.S., you're no danger in the U.S., and you can't apply for entry to Canada. If you do cross illegally, however, this is a loophole, you're arrested, and then the process of application begins. When this provision was introduced, I think in 2003, if I'm not mistaken, a number of people said, whoa, wait a minute, you've left a big loophole here. This is not going to work. People are just going to go around the border. And that indeed is what's happening. As I say, Jason Kenney's saying close that loophole, but how practically do you do that? It's a huge undefended border, as we know. I mean, do we have police patrols all the whole length of the border at every little, country road that crosses? It becomes impractical. Although, if some of the would-be refugees realize that this is no longer a safe way into Canada, that may stem the tide. I'm not sure. It's a very complicated situation.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, go ahead, John.
Bear in mind as well, first, as I said, they're not likely to be accepted, although the process is cumbersome and can take years before a final decision is made. They're able to appeal and appeal again. One of the situations that we need to look at is, once again, the very cumbersome and complicated process that we have for refugee claimants. Let's not forget as well that if they were accepted as refugees, then there are people languishing in camps in the Middle East who would not be coming into Canada because their places were taken by Somali refugees crossing from Minnesota, or there are economic class migrants who would not be able to leave the Philippines or China or India or other countries because their places are being taken by Somali refugee claimants, or we would simply have to blow up the quota system and let everybody in. I'm all for letting everybody in. That's always been my policy. We should have the same immigration policy we had when my ancestors came, which is if you can get here, you're in. But that's not the consensus among the Canadian populace, and this whole thing risks not only depriving other people of entry to Canada, but of undermining confidence in the immigration system.
Let me jump in because, Ralph Goodale was on CBC Radio's The House yesterday. He addressed what Canadian officials are saying to their American counterparts. Let's take a listen to the minister.
We are in close communication with authorities in the United States so that information is shared. We're obviously explaining to them what we're dealing with when people arrive unannounced in irregular ways across the border, and making sure that they understand what's happening on their side of the border.
Now, Katie, in some ways this picks up on John's point, this idea that it seems that the migrants who come here are under the impression that if they get to Canada, they'll be allowed to stay, period. Should the government be doing more to discourage people from essentially making this dangerous travel?
I think that's probably a good idea. What's really important to remember here is we are in such a weird, anomalous situation. We've never really seen anything quite like this before with the United States for any number of reasons. I think it would perhaps be dangerous to revamp our entire system of handling refugees and asylum claims and that sort of thing simply based on this alone. I mean, we are looking at, probably a few hundred, maybe a couple of thousand people who have crossed so far and are expected to, but this is not sort of tens of thousands of people overwhelming the border of Manitoba. I think we got to keep it in perspective, but also not necessarily upend our entire system just to deal with what is, frankly, kind of a weird and anomalous situation in the U.S., not so much on this side of the border.
But the Manitoba Premier, right, sorry to interrupt there, Katie, but, the Manitoba Premier, right off top, seems to be asking for some type of help from Ottawa. What type of help can Ottawa give? Katie, I interrupted you. I'll ask that of you right now.
Well, money is always the obvious one. Perhaps more funding for RCMP and for border guards to sort of patrol that area. I'd actually like to hear from the Manitoba Premier kind of more of what he feels is necessary, because in general, it tends to be the federal government that picks up the tab for immigration processing and for, in some cases, the border police work. So I would be curious to hear what it is that Manitoba feels, how it feels its resources are being depleted in a way that could be sort of rectified by Ottawa.
And can I just say, Michael, that while we all seem to agree on this panel that we don't have a huge, pressure on our borders or anything from illegal refugees, or from refugees claiming asylum here, it's politically a tinderbox. I mean, this is a very politically fraught issue at this moment with the Conservative leadership going on, and I think that our federal government, the Liberal governments, have not been very reassuring or very complete in their discussion of what's really going on. They've sort of said they're monitoring the situation. They've been vague about numbers. They've been vague about who is actually coming. At one point, the fear was, the expectation was that because of Trump's many menacing gestures towards Mexicans, and including undocumented Mexicans within the states, they would start flooding north. That's not happening. In fact, they're more likely to try to go back to Mexico if they're nervous about Trump. In terms of the Somali cadres that are coming, this has been a trickle that's been going on for quite a long time. It predates Trump. Now, Trump and his hostility to Muslims and to people from certain countries, including Somalia, has definitely made a lot of people more nervous. But how many people? We need some facts. John says most of these applications will be dismissed, and these people will be sent back to the States. I mean, is that the case? the federal government has not really sat down with the media and given a full briefing on the implications of this, and they should do, because it would allay a lot of fears, I think.
Sorry to interrupt, Katie, but do you want to play a clip here? Because, you know, Susan, you mentioned the Conservative Party, the Conservative public safety critic, Tony Clement. He was asked by CBC Radio about this issue, what his solution to the migrant issue at the border might look like. Take a listen to what Tony Clement told CBC Radio in Montreal this week.
The RCMP are there on the border. What would you like them to do differently?
I would like the government to come up with a plan to apply the law.
And my question is, what would that? Yeah, what would that mean? Well, I'm just curious to know what happens to those people who are crossing on foot when they meet the police.
I'm not the government. The CBC is not the government. It's up to the government.
But with respect, you're the official opposition, and you're supposed to be coming up with solutions as well as just criticizing.
Come up with a plan.
But what? So you don't have any idea how it should work?
Sir, now you're putting words in my mouth.
Well, then tell us what. Then tell us how it should work.
Sir,
I mean, it's a simple question.
We have a problem. It's simple. Apply the law.
Well, how would they apply the law? So would they stop them? Would they say, "I'm sorry, you can't cross here, and you should go back across the border"? How would?
We were talking about Tony Clement addressing the issue of migrants at the border. And really, you had CBC Radio there trying to pin Tony Clement, the critic on public safety, essentially to give an alternative. If he's unhappy with what the government is doing, what is the alternative? He wasn't giving an answer. John, how helpful is that? And it's only one question because we have to put a bow on this topic to move on to the next. But how helpful is that?
Well, it's not helpful for Tony Clement, who lost his temper, and it's not helpful for the Conservatives, but they're in the same boat as the Liberals. The reason that the Liberals don't sit down and explain what they're doing on this situation is that no one knows what to do on this situation, whether you're the governing party or the official opposition. The laws exist, this loophole exists, and there's no obvious way to close the loophole anytime soon. We're stuck with what we've got.